Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take a massive stack of sources and, we pull out the most essential knowledge you need to be well-informed, fast.
Today we are undertaking, well, a pretty deep dive into the very bedrock of organized human life, social
We're
institutions.
talking about the big ones, right? Family, religion, education.
Exactly. The enduring structures that, really organize all of us, government, the economy, they all fit in here.
And our sources today are just fascinating. We're bridging classical sociological theory from, the 19th century? We're talking giants like Durkheim and Weber.
And we're putting them in conversation with some very contemporary data, things like analyzing social media discourse on low fertility in East Asia right now.
So the mission today is to trace how these core pillars, let's focus on religion, family, and education, how they were originally defined, how they maintained order.
And how they are now, well, transforming, and in some cases, even fragmenting under the pressure of modern life, of individualism and our digital world.
Right, because we sort of take these things for granted, but they serve these incredibly fundamental roles. They're the established machinery of society.
They really are. They simplify our behavior, they give us ready-made social roles, and crucially, they allocate resources. They're kind of the rules of the game.
The invisible systems that ensure stability.
Mm.
But what happens when the needs they were designed to meet change?
That is the crux of this entire deep dive. We're tracing this massive shift from the deeply collective and sacred all the way to, well, modern digital dilemmas.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning of this idea of collective structure. Religion. Classical sociology was obsessed with it.
Absolutely. They were trying to figure out how it maintains social order and, how it connects to the economy. And you have to begin with Emil Durkheim.
Specifically his work, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life.
Yes. And Durkheim had this really radical idea about where religion actually comes from.
Which was that it's not from a divine source, but it's a social thing. It's a collective emotional experience.
Precisely. His most famous conclusion is that religion is society symbolized and writ large. When a community gathers to worship, what they're really worshiping is the power of their own society, their own group.
That feeling of shared awe is just misinterpreted as something divine.
Exactly, but it originates from the group itself. And he looked at one of the simplest social structures to prove this: totemism in some Australian tribes.
The totem, that little figurine of an animal or a plant.
Yes. For Durkheim, that totem is the symbol of the collective ideology. It embodies the power of the tribe, and because it represents the group,
Yeah.
it becomes sacred.
And that sacred object then becomes the source of all the moral rules for that society.
Which brings us to his critical distinction, separating the sacred from the profane. This was a huge sociological move
Why was it so radical?
because it took religion out of theology and put it squarely into sociology. The sacred is, the extraordinary, the supernatural realm that inspires awe.
And the profane is just everything else.
Everything else, your daily chores, the ordinary, the commonplace. And religion, for Durkheim, exists to create the rules and rituals that manage the separation between those two spheres.
So functionally, it's about discipline, it's about cohesion, that social bond, and it gives kind of personal vitality, right? It lifts the individual spirit.
It creates the moral glue that holds it all together. But then Max Weber comes along and he takes that moral glue and spins it into industrial gold.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Weber looked at religion not through collective ritual, but through rationalization and economic structure.
His work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, is just seminal. He links specific Christian theology directly to economic behavior.
He noticed something on the ground, didn't he?
He did. He saw that in these emerging industrial societies, Protestants, and specifically Calvinists, were way overrepresented among skilled laborers, business owners, successful entrepreneurs.
While Catholics were more content in, traditional craftsmanship roles.
Right, and he wondered why. What was the specific mental characteristic driving this difference?
And he called it the capitalist spirit.
Yes, but it's a very specific definition. It wasn't just being greedy or clever. It was the relentless, rational, almost obsessive urge to constantly accumulate wealth.
Even when you don't need it.
Especially when you don't need it. And to reinvest it, not to spend it.
And this came directly from a religious concept, the calling.
Exactly. So Martin Luther had first floated this idea that your secular job, a carpenter, a merchant, was a calling, a sacred duty from God. But then Calvinism took that and fused it with the crushing existential anxiety of predestination.
Okay, so just for anyone who doesn't know, predestination means your salvation is already decided. You can't earn your way into heaven.
Correct. And you can never know if you're among the chosen faction. This created a profound psychological problem.
If you can't buy salvation, what do you do?
Yeah. You search for signs of grace. And the way you did that was by leading a life that was incredibly rational, hardworking, successful, sober, non-wasteful. That was how you signaled to yourself and to your community that you might be one of the elect.
Wait, but isn't that a huge contradiction? They're pursuing enormous wealth, but they're supposed to be austere and shun leisure.
That's the brilliant irony Weber found. Their theological anxiety demanded tireless, rational work. That work created wealth. But their theology forbade them from spending it frivolously.
So what did they do with the money?
They reinvested it. And this relentless cycle, this rational pursuit of productivity driven by spiritual panic, it turned them into these sturdy business managers. It basically created the psychological framework for modern capitalism.
Wow. So we go from a collective, sacred ritual binding society together to individual, spiritual anxiety driving endless accumulation. That is a profound shift.
It's a huge shift.
So let's pivot to the family, the institution that was, I guess, responsible for raising these new, sturdy business managers, the primary unit of socialization.
The family is the essential building block, but its structure is so far from being fixed. I mean, historically, you had extended multi-generational patriarchal households. Think of the Roman paterfamilias.
Right. They were economic units as much as social ones.
Exactly. But the Industrial Revolution just shattered that model. People moved to cities for factory work, and they got cut off from their extended kin.
And that's how we got the nuclear family, just parents and kids, becoming the dominant model in the West.
And today, it's even more diverse. Single-parent homes, blended families, cohabiting couples. It reflects massive economic and cultural shifts.
And these shifts are creating some really acute crises today. I mean, we have this compelling source material analyzing social media discourse on the low fertility crisis in China, Japan, and South Korea.
Right, and these are societies really grappling with this institutional stress. The causes are pretty universal across the region. High cost of living, especially housing and education.
Economic uncertainty.
And, crucially, the stubborn persistence of traditional gender roles. Women are often expected to have a career and be the primary, if not sole, caregiver. It's a massive disincentive to have children.
So what does the social media data actually show? What's driving the online conversation in these three countries?
It reveals this fascinating split. In China, the dialogue is highly value-driven. Over 57% of the discussion was about values, things like individualism, gender equality, family diversity.
So young Chinese people are prioritizing personal fulfillment over the traditional duty of continuing the family line.
It seems so. But in Japan and South Korea, the data tells a more pragmatic story.
More focused on utility.
Exactly. In South Korea, over 51%, and Japan, around 35%, the conversation was mostly about the immediate payoff of having kids. Reproduction, emotional reward, intergenerational support.
But the one thing they all had in common was anxiety about money.
Oh, massively. Child-rearing cost was a huge topic everywhere, but especially in Japan, where it was over 27% of the conversation.
And the sentiment was pretty negative, right? The source mentioned a strong antinatalist feeling.
A major finding. In China, over half of the reproduction-related comments showed outright opposition. But maybe the most insightful part of the source is the media disconnect they found.
What's that?
Well, in Japan and South Korea, when users commented on videos posted by mainstream official media, the government voice promoting higher birth rates, they displayed a significantly stronger antinatal sentiment.
Wait, so the official message, trying to get people to have kids, actually made them angrier about it?
It intensified the negative sentiment. It suggests this profound breakdown of institutional credibility. Young adults hear the official message, but they feel the crushing reality of the economy, the housing crisis, the gender inequality. The institutional voice just rings hollow.
And that might actually be generating resistance.
Wow.
That really shows how values are being shaped outside of these traditional structures now.
It really does.
Let's move to our third institution, education, the system that's supposed to move young people into the mainstream.
And education is so much more than just academics. Sociologists break its functions down into two groups: the manifest or intended functions.
And the latent or unintended ones.
Exactly. So the manifest functions are obvious: socialization, teaching norms and values; social integration, creating a shared identity; social placement, sorting people for adult roles, transmitting culture.
But the latent functions are where it gets interesting.
They really are. I mean, a huge one is childcare. It provides massive-scale childcare for working parents. It also establishes vital peer relationships. And pragmatically, it lowers the unemployment rate by keeping millions of young people out of the labor force.
That completely reframes the whole discussion. So what are the major sociological perspectives on how the classroom actually works?
Well, the functionalist perspective sees education as a pillar of stability. It teaches knowledge, it transmits culture, and it generates new knowledge to help society progress. It works.
So the conflict perspective, unsurprisingly, sees something very different.
It sees education as a tool used by institutions to perpetuate social inequality. And a key mechanism for that is tracking.
Assigning students to different programs, like a college track versus a vocational track.
Right. And while the idea is to customize learning, in practice, it often just reinforces existing social class and racial inequalities. It sets kids on a path very early on.
And this view also points to the hidden curriculum.
The hidden curriculum is all the non-academic stuff you learn at school. The subtle values and beliefs like respecting authority without question, punctuality, deference to the status quo.
It prepares you for your role in the existing social hierarchy.
Precisely. Then the third view, the interactionist perspective, zooms way in on the micro-level stuff happening inside the school.
This is where we get the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Or the Pygmalion effect, yes. It's the idea that a teacher's expectations, which they communicate in really subtle ways, praise, criticism, body language, directly influence how a student performs.
So if a teacher thinks a student is a high achiever, that student internalizes that label and actually does better.
Yes, confirming the teacher's original, possibly arbitrary expectation. It's this closed feedback loop. It just shows the immense power institutions have in shaping individual reality through everyday interactions.
In the U.S., education has been this constant source of conflict and reform. We went from focusing on assimilation to winning the space race.
And then after the 1980s, to this intense international comparison, which led to policies like No Child Left Behind in 2001.
Which tied school performance so heavily to standardized test scores.
And the criticism there was that it led to teaching to the test, and that more complex, higher-order thinking skills got neglected in the process.
And of course, you can't talk about education in the U.S. without the conflict over religion in public schools.
No, that line between church and state is constantly being tested. Key Supreme Court rulings like Engel v. Vitale banned school-sponsored prayer. A year later, another ruling banned voluntary Bible readings.
The idea being that the institution of education has to remain secular to serve everyone.
Right. And you see the same kind of tension in debates over things like bilingual education. Educators support it for pedagogical reasons, but other institutional forces oppose it, prioritizing rapid cultural assimilation instead.
So as we pull all of these threads together, what's the big picture that emerges about these traditional institutions?
I think the picture is one of adaptation and, frankly, challenge. There's a growing emphasis globally on individual choice over institutional dictates. Some sociologists call this deinstitutionalization.
Which means challenging the monopoly that family and religion once had on shaping our norms and driving social change.
Exactly. Factors like the internet and social media are now incredibly powerful agents of socialization. They operate at a speed that traditional structures they can't match. So while family, religion, and education are still crucial, they now have to compete and interact with these new global network structures.
It's incredible. We started this deep dive with Durkheim, watching a collective society build bonds around a simple, sacred totem. We traveled through Weber's analysis of how theological anxiety created the capitalist mindset.
And we landed on young adults using short-form video apps to debate the cost of having children, showing a total disconnect with official institutional messages.
That whole journey, from the collective sacred to the individualized, rational, and technologically driven value system, it just perfectly illustrates this shift.
The shifting gravity of social control.
So, if the core function of an institution like the family is socialization, and our sources show these digital platforms becoming primary drivers of our values, here's the provocative thought for you to carry forward. Does the vast global digital network, the platform, the feed, the algorithm, now represent the newest, most volatile, and maybe the least accountable major social institution shaping our world today?